The arrest and assassination of Ngo Dinh Diem, the president of South Vietnam, marked the culmination of a successful CIA-backed coup d'etat led by General Dương Văn Minh in November 1963. On the 2nd of November 1963, Diem and his advisor, his younger brother Ngo Dinh Nhu, were arrested after the Army of the Republic of Vietnam had been successful in a bloody overnight siege on Gia Long Palace in Saigon. The coup was the culmination of 9 years of autocratic and nepotistic family rule in South Vietnam. Discontent with the Diem regime had been simmering below the surface, and exploded with mass Buddhist protests against long-standing religious discrimination after the government shooting of protesters who defied a ban on the flying of the Buddhist flag. When rebel forces entered the palace, the Ngo brothers were not present, having escaped before to a loyalist shelter in Ngo Dinh. The brothers had kept in communication with the rebels through a direct link from the shelter to the palace, and misled them into believing that they were still in the palace. The Ngo brothers soon agreed to surrender and were promised safe exile. After being arrested, they were instead executed in the back of an armored personnel carrier by ARVN officers on the journey back to military headquarters at Tan Son, NHT Air Base. While no formal inquiry was conducted, the responsibility for the deaths of the Ngo brothers is commonly placed on Minh's bodyguard, Captain Nguyen Van Nung, and on Major Duong Hie, both of whom guarded the brothers during the trip. Minh's army colleagues and U.S. officials in Saigon agreed that Minh ordered the executions. They postulated various motives, including that the brothers had embarrassed Minh by fleeing the Gia Long Palace, and that the brothers were killed to prevent a later political comeback. The generals initially attempted to cover up the execution by suggesting that the brothers had committed suicide, but this was contradicted when photos of the NGO's corpses surfaced in the media. Background: Diem's political career began in July 1954, when he was appointed the Prime Minister of the State of Vietnam by former Emperor Bao Thai, who was head of state. At the time, Vietnam had been partitioned at the Geneva Conference after the defeat of the French Union forces at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, with the state of Vietnam ruling the country south of the 17th parallel. The partition was intended to be temporary, with national elections scheduled for 1956 to create a government of a reunified nation. In the meantime, Diem and Bao Thai were locked in a power struggle. Bao Thai disliked Diem but selected him in the hope that he would attract American aid. The issue was brought to a head when Diem scheduled a referendum for October 1955 on whether South Vietnam should become a republic. Diem won the rigged referendum and proclaimed himself the president of the newly created Republic of Vietnam. Diem refused to hold the reunification elections, on the basis that the state of Vietnam was not a signatory to the Geneva Accords. He then proceeded to strengthen his autocratic and nepotistic rule over the country. Her constitution was written by a rubber-stamp legislature which gave Diem the power to create laws by decree and arbitrarily give himself emergency powers. Dissidents, both communist and nationalist, were jailed and executed in the thousands, and elections were routinely rigged. Opposition candidates were threatened with being charged for conspiring with the Viet Cong, which carried the death penalty, and in many areas, large numbers of ARVN troops were sent to stuff ballot boxes. Diem kept the control of the nation firmly within the hands of his brothers and their in-laws, and promotions in the ARVN were given on the basis of religion and loyalty rather than merit. Two unsuccessful attempts had been made to depose Diem. In 1960, a paratroop revolt was quashed after Diem stalled negotiations to buy time for loyalists to put down the coup attempt, while a 1962 palace bombing by two Air Force pilots failed to kill him. South Vietnam's Buddhist majority had long been discontented with Diem's strong favoritism towards Catholics. Public servants and army officers had long been promoted on the basis of religious preference, and government contracts, U.S. economic assistance, business favors and tax concessions were preferentially given to Catholics. The Roman Catholic Church was the largest landowner in the country, and its holdings were exempt from land reform. In the countryside, Catholics were de facto exempt from performing corvée labor. Discontent with Diem and NHU exploded into mass protest during the summer of 1963 when 9 Buddhists died at the hand of Diem's army and police on Vesak, the birthday of Gautama Buddha. In May 1963, a law against the flying of religious flags was selectively invoked. The Buddhist flag was banned from display on Vesak, while the Vatican flag was displayed to celebrate the anniversary of the consecration of Archbishop Pierre-Martin Ngo Dinh Thuc, Diem's elder brother. The Buddhists defied the ban and a protest was ended when government forces opened fire, with Diem remaining intransigent in the face of escalating Buddhist demands for religious equality. Sections of society began calling for his removal from power. The key turning point came shortly after midnight on the 21st of August when NHU's special forces raided and vandalized Buddhist pagodas across the country, arresting thousands of monks and causing a death toll estimated to be in the hundreds. Numerous coup plans had been explored by the army before, but the plotters intensified their activities with increased confidence after the administration of U.S. President John F. Kennedy authorized the U.S. Embassy to explore the possibility of a leadership change. Surrender and debate. At 13:30 on the 1st of November, Generals Duong Van Minh and Trn Van Thon, respectively the presidential military advisor and army chief of staff, led a coup against Diem, assisted by mutinous ARVN officers. The rebels had carefully devised plans to neutralize loyalist officers to prevent them from saving Diem. Unknown to Diem, General Thin, the supposed loyalist who commanded the ARVN 3rd Corps that surrounded the Saigon area, had allied himself with the plotters of the coup. The second of Diem's most trusted loyalist generals was Hein Van Cao, who commanded the 4th Corps in the Mekong Delta. Diem and NHU were aware of the coup plan, and NHU responded by planning a counter-coup, which he called Operation Bravo. This plan involved Thin and Colonel Tung, the loyalist commander of the Special Forces, staging a phony rebellion before the forces crushed the uprising to reaffirm the power of the Ngo family. Unaware that Thin was plotting against him, NHU allowed Thin to organize troops as he saw fit, and Thin transferred the command of the 7th Division from CAO's 4th Corps to his own 3rd Corps. This allowed Colonel Ngo Dinh, Thin's deputy, to take command of the 7th Division based at My Tho. The transfer allowed the rebels to completely encircle the capital and denied Cao the opportunity of storming Saigon and protecting Diem, as he had done during the previous coup attempt in 1960. Minh and Thon had invited senior Saigon-based officers to a meeting at Tan Son NHT Air Base, headquarters of the Joint General Staff, on the pretext of routine business. Instead, they announced that a coup was underway, with only a few, including Tung, refusing to join. Tung was later forced at gunpoint to order his loyalist special forces to surrender. The coup went smoothly as the rebels quickly captured captured all key installations in Saigon and sealed incoming roads to prevent loyalist forces from entering. This left only the Presidential Guard to defend Gia Long Palace. The rebels attacked government and loyalist army buildings but delayed the attack on the palace, hoping that Diem would resign and accept the offer of safe passage and exile. Diem refused, vowing to reassert his control. After sunset, the 7th Division of Colonel Nguyen Van Thieu, who later became the nation's president, led an assault on Gia Long Palace and it fell by daybreak. In the early morning of the 2nd of November, Diem agreed to surrender. The ARVN officers had intended to exile Diem and Nhu, having promised the Ngo brothers safe passage out of the country. At 6 o'clock, just before dawn, the officers held a meeting at JGS headquarters to discuss the fate of the Ngo brothers. According to Lucien Conin, the U.S. Army officer and CIA operative who was the American liaison with the coup, most of the officers, including Min, wanted Diem to have an honorable retirement from office, followed by exile. Not all of the senior officers attended the meeting, with having already left to make arrangements for the arrival of Diem and Nhu at JGS headquarters. General Lo, a former police chief under Diem in the mid-1950s, strongly lobbied for Diem's execution. There was no formal vote taken at the meeting, and attracted only minority support. One general was reported to have said, "To kill weeds, you must pull them up at the roots." Conin reported that the generals had never indicated that assassination was in the minds, since an orderly transition of power was a high priority in achieving their ultimate aim of gaining international recognition. Minanthon asked Conin to secure an American aircraft to take the brothers out of the country. 2 days earlier, U.S. Ambassador to Vietnam, Henry Cabot Lodge, Jr., had alerted Washington that such a request was likely and recommended Saigon as the departure point. This request put the Kennedy administration in a difficult position, as the provision of an airplane would publicly tie it to the coup. When Conin telephoned David Smith, the acting chief of the Saigon CIA station, there was a 10-minute delay. The U.S. government would not allow the aircraft to land in any country, unless that state was willing to grant asylum to Diem. The United States did not want Diem and Nhu to form a government in exile and wanted them far away from Vietnam. Assistant Secretary of State Roger Hilsman had written in August that, under no circumstances should the Nhus be permitted to remain in Southeast Asia in close proximity to Vietnam because of the plots they will mount to try to regain power. If the generals decide to exile Diem, he should also be sent outside Southeast Asia. Quote, he further went on to anticipate what he termed a Gotterdam rung in the palace. We should encourage the coup group to fight the battle to the end and destroy the palace if necessary to gain victory. Unconditional surrender should be the terms for the Ngo family, since it will otherwise seek to outmaneuver both the coup's forces and the U.S. If the family is taken alive, the Nhus should be banished to France or any other country willing to receive them. Diem should be treated as the general's wish. After surrendering, Diem called Lodge by telephone for the last time. Lodge did not report the conversation to Washington, so it was widely assumed that the pair last spoke on the previous afternoon when the coup was just starting. However, after Lodge died in 1985, his aide, Colonel Mike Dunn, said that Lodge and Diem spoke for the last time around 7 o'clock on the 2nd of November, moments after Diem surrendered. When Diem called, Lodge put on hold, and then walked away. Upon his return, the ambassador offered Diem and Nhu asylum, but would not arrange for transportation to the Philippines until the next day. This contradicted his earlier offer of asylum the previous day when he implored implored Diem to not resist the coup. Dund offered to personally go to the brothers' hideout to escort him so that the generals could not kill him, but Lodge refused, saying, "We just can't get that involved." Dund said, "I was really astonished that we didn't do more for them." Having refused to help the brothers to leave the country safely, Lodge later said after they had been shot, "What would we have done with them if they had lived? Every Colonel Blimp in the world would have made use of them." Dunn also claimed that Lodge put Diem on hold in order to inform Conine where the Ngo brothers were so the generals could capture them. When confronted about Dunn's claim by a historian, Conine denied the account. It was also revealed that Conine had phoned the embassy early on the same morning to inquire about the general's request for a plane to transport Diem and NHU out of Saigon. One of Lodge's staff told Conine that the plane would have to go directly to the faraway asylum-offering country, so that the brothers could not disembark at a nearby stopover country and stay there to foment a counter-coup. Conine was told that the nearest plane that was capable of such a long-range flight was in Guam, and it would take 24 hours to make the necessary arrangements. Min was astounded and told Conine that the generals could not hold Diem for the period. Conine did not suspect a deliberate delay by the American embassy. In contrast, a U.S. Senate investigative commission in the early 1970s raised a provocative thought: one wonders what became of the U.S. military aircraft that had been dispatched to stand by for Lodge's departure, scheduled for the previous day. The historian Mark Moyar suspected that Lodge could have flown Diem to Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines, which was under American jurisdiction, before taking him to the final destination. Moyar speculated that, when Lodge had offered the jet the day before, he had done it to induce Diem to give up at a time when the outcome of the insurrection was very much in doubt. Now that the coup clearly had succeeded, Lodge no longer needed to offer such an incentive. Intended a arrest at Gia Long Palace. In the meantime, Min left the JGS headquarters and traveled to Gia Long Palace in a sedan with his aide and bodyguard, Captain Nguyen Van Nung. Min had also dispatched a M113 armored personnel carrier and 4 jeeps to Gia Long to transport Diem and NHU back to JGS headquarters. While Min was on the way to supervise the takeover of the palace, Generals Thon, Trn Thien Kim and Levan Kim prepared the army headquarters for Diem's arrival and the ceremonial handover of power to the junta. Diem's pictures were taken down and his statue was covered up. A large table covered with green felt was brought in with the intention of seating Diem for the handover to Min and Vice President Nguyen Ngoc Tho, who was to become the civilian prime minister during a nationally televised event witnessed by international media. Diem and NHU would then ask the generals to be granted exile and asylum in a foreign country, which would be granted. The brothers were then to be held in a secure place at JGS headquarters while awaiting deportation. Min arrived at the palaces at 8 o'clock in full military ceremonial uniform to supervise the arrest of Diem and NHU for the surrender ceremony. Diem's escape. Min instead arrived to find that the brothers were not in the palace. In anticipation of a coup, they had ordered the construction of 3 separate tunnels leading from Gia Long to remote areas outside the palace. Around 2000 on the night of the coup, with only the Presidential Guard to defend them against mutinous infantry and armor units, Diem and NHU hurriedly packed American banknotes into a briefcase. They escaped through one of the tunnels with 2 loyalists. Air Force Lieutenant Tho, Diem's aide-de-camp, who happened to be a nephew of Colonel Th Mao, the director of military security and a participant in the coup plot, and Shan Vy, head of NHU's Republican Youth. After the coup, General Paul Harkins, the head of the presence in Vietnam, inspected the tunnel and noted that it was so far down that I didn't want to go down to walk up the thing. The brothers emerged in a wooded area in a park near the Cercle Sportif, the city's upper-class sporting club, where they were picked up by a waiting Land Rover. Ellen Hammer disputes the tunnel escape, asserting that the Ngo brothers simply walked out of the building, which was not yet under siege. Hammer asserts that they walked past the tennis courts and left the palace grounds through a small gate at La Than Ton Street and entered the car. The Loyalists traveled through narrow back streets in order to evade rebel checkpoints and changed vehicles to a black Citroën sedan. After leaving the palace, Nhu was reported to have suggested to Diem that the brothers split up, arguing that this would enhance their chances of survival. Nhu proposed that one of them travel to the Mekong Delta to join CAO's 4th Corps, while the other would travel to the 2nd Corps of General Nguyen Khan in the Central Highlands. Nhu felt the rebel generals would not dare to kill one of them while the other was free, in case the surviving brother were to regain power. According to one account, Diem was reported to have turned down Nhu, reasoning that, "You cannot leave alone. They hate you too much, they will kill you. Stay with me and I will protect you." Another story holds that Diem said, "We have always been together during these last years. How could we separate during these last years? How could we separate in this critical hour?" Nhu agreed to remain with his brother. The Loyalists reached the home of Ma Tu-yen in the Chinese business district of Colin. Ma Tu-yen was a Chinese merchant and friend who was reported to be Nhu's main contact with the Chinese syndicates which controlled the opium trade. The brothers sought asylum from the Embassy of the Republic of China, but were turned down and stayed in Ma Tu-yen's house as they appealed to ARVN Loyalists and attempted to negotiate with the coup leaders. Nhu's secret agents had fitted the home with a direct phone line to the palace, so the insurgent generals believed that the brothers were still besieged inside Gia Long. Neither the rebels nor the Loyalist Presidential Guard had any idea that at 2100 they were about to fight for an empty building. Min was reported to be mortified when he realized that Diem and Nhu had escaped during the night. Arrest in Colin. After Min had ordered the rebels to search the areas known to have been frequented by the Ngo family, Colonel Pham Ngoc Thao was informed by a captured Presidential Guard officer that the brothers had escaped through the tunnels to a refuge in Colin. Thao was told by Kim, his superior, to locate Diem and prevent him from being killed. When Thao arrived at Ma Tu-yen's house, he phoned his superiors. Diem and Nhu overheard him and they drove them to the nearby Catholic Church of St. Francis Xavier, which they had frequented over the years. Lieutenant Ngo died a few months later in a plane crash, but his diary was not found until 1970. Though recorded Diem's words as they left the house of Ma Tu-yen as being, "I don't know whether I will live or die and I don't care, but tell Nguyen Khan that I have great affection for him and he should avenge me." Soon after, the early morning mass was celebrated for All Souls' Day, and after the congregation had left the building, the Ngo brothers walked through the shady courtyard and into the church wearing dark grey suits. It was speculated that they were recognized by an informant as they walked through the yard. Inside the church, the brothers prayed and received communion. A few minutes later, just after 10 o'clock, an armored personnel carrier and 2 jeeps entered the narrow alcove housing the church building. Lieutenant Ngo, who had earlier urged Diem to surrender, saying that he was sure that his uncle Th Mao, along with Thin and Kim, would guarantee the safety, wrote in his diary later, "I consider myself responsible for having led them to the death convoy to JGS headquarters. The convoy was led by General Mhu Shan and consisted of Colonels Nguyen Van Quan and Wang Ngoc Lam. Quan was the deputy of Min and Lam was the commander of Diem's civil guard. Lam had joined the coup once a rebel victory seemed assured. Two further officers made up the convoy, Major Duong Hieu Gia and Captain Nguyen Van Nung. Nung was Min's bodyguard. Diem requested that the convoy stop at the palace so that he could gather personal items before being exiled. Shan turned him down, clinically stating that his orders were to take Diem and Nhu directly to headquarters. Nhu expressed disgust that they were to be transported in an APC, asking, "You use such a vehicle to drive the president?" Lam assured them that the armor was for their own protection. Shan said that it was selected to protect them from extremists. Shan ordered the brothers' hands be tied behind the backs before shoving them into the carrier. One officer asked to shoot Nhu, but Shan turned him down. Assassination. After the arrest, Nung and Gia sat with the brothers in the APC, and the convoy departed for Tan Son Nht. Before the convoy had departed for the church, Min was reported to have gestured to Nung with two fingers. This was taken to be an order to kill both brothers. The convoy stopped at a railroad crossing on the return trip, where by all accounts the brothers were assassinated. An investigation by Thon determined that Gia had shot the brothers at point-blank range with a semi-automatic firearm and that Nung sprayed them with bullets before repeatedly stabbing the bodies with a knife. Gia gave his account of what occurred during the journey back to the military headquarters. "As we rode back to the Joint General Staff headquarters, Diem sat silently, but Nhu and the captain began to insult each other. I don't know who started it. The name-calling grew passionate. The captain had hated Nhu before. Now he was charged with emotion." Gia said that when the convoy reached a train crossing, lunged at Nhu with a bayonet and stabbed him again and again, maybe 15 or 20 times. Still in a rage, he turned to Diem, took out his revolver and shot him in the head. Then he looked back at Nhu, who was lying on the floor, twitching. He put a bullet into his head too. Neither Diem nor Nhu ever defended themselves. The hands were tied.